Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries, and this video is about running Fate as a one-shot. Now, the idea for this video came from Zachary Wolf on the Fate Community Google Plus page, and he was asking if I could just make a quick video about running Fate as a one-shot. He also wants to know if characters should be fully prepped or left with some blanks. So I'm going to start this off by asking a few questions, hinting at things you need to think about when you're doing a one-shot, especially if you're doing one with Fate, although a lot of the advice can be carried forward to other systems, and then hopefully I'm going to provide some answers that will be useful for you. So the first question we're going to ask is, why is Fate great for one-shots? Well, first of all, before I start, let me just say thanks very much to Zachary for the suggestion. I've run a fair few one-shots using a number of different systems, but time and again I find myself returning to Fate when I want that quick one-shot hit of role-playing entertainment. The reason for this is that Fate encourages a cinematic style of play that is very character-centric. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, in some games, the plot and the world exist, and the players are small parts of that. If they get lucky, they may rise to influence great events over time, but by and large, they're very small cogs in an immeasurably huge machine. In Fate, the players start the game as movers and shakers, powerful individuals who have the ability to affect dramatic change on their environment and the world around them. Now, some people may not like this style of play, particularly for a campaign, but that's a topic for another time. It's hard to deny that in a one-shot, where you generally have a few hours of game time at most, it's enjoyable to play these powerful characters. And when we say powerful characters, we're not talking about cool powers or anything like that. Remember, we're talking about the ability to effect change in the world around you. This is also great for GMs. Now, if I run a D&D one-shot and all the players are first level, then there's a limit to the opposition that I can reasonably throw against the player characters. So either I have to try and find a way around that, perhaps getting the players, or myself if they're pre-gens, to create characters at a higher level than first level, or perhaps I just put up with it and the game becomes Attack of the Half-Hit Dice Zombie Goblins or something like that. In Fate, this isn't really an issue. The GM can throw a lot more at the players without having to worry as much about game balance. And also, given how easy it is for the GM to create antagonists in Fate, you're not going to spend ages pouring through huge tomes of creatures and the like to find those antagonists in the first place. So, what sort of characters should you have for a Fate one-shot? Now, when it comes to prepping for a one-shot, one of the decisions that every GM will have to make is whether the game is going to use pre-gen characters or allow the players to create their own characters. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to each of these two approaches. If you choose to use pre-gen characters, that means the players don't have to create the characters themselves, and this is often a benefit for those players who don't possess the rules. Although that's not such a problem with Fate, since the rules are available on a pay-what-you-want basis on DriveThruRPG, and I'll put a link down below in the description to this video. It also means that the GM can create a working party of characters with complementary abilities that suit the adventure. However, it does mean that, in addition to doing all your other prep work, as a GM, you also have to design all of these characters. And even with systems like Fate, where character creation is fairly swift, that still takes time. Allowing the players to create their own characters generally means that you either need to give them some more advanced notice about the one-shot, so they have time to create their characters. Or you could sacrifice some time at the start of your session to allow for character creation. Maybe you run a separate session 0 prior to the actual one-shot in order to discuss character creation. Because creating characters in Fate is fairly quick in general, it is possible to create characters at the start of a session. However, each minute you spend on that is a minute that you're effectively sacrificing from the actual session. I don't think there's really a right or a wrong answer in regards to whether to use pre-gens or not. I've used both of the approaches myself. However, when I'm running a game, if I have a group that knows the system, I'll generally try and gather the players a couple of weeks in advance and set up an event on social media like Facebook or Google+, so that the players have time to create their characters and they can discuss it with each other online. This also gives players who are a little less sure of the rules or who have questions about the setting time to get in touch with me prior to the game and get answers. If I'm running a convention style game like the ones I've run at BrigadeCon, then I'll most often go for pre-gen characters, simply because people are usually busy, maybe a bit frazzled if they've been involved in lots of other stuff going on. They've been playing in lots of multiple games and panels and stuff like that. They just want to turn up and jump into a game, get on with playing and enjoy themselves. And to be honest, I can't fault them. Fate, however, does offer a potential middle ground between these two options. The rules of Fate actually encourage players, if they can't think of all their aspects or stunts at the beginning, to leave some of them blank and create them during a game. If you expand on this idea slightly, you as a GM can create almost complete characters, but leave some bits blank, some aspects and stunts for the players to fill in during the game. This has the benefit of you knowing that the characters will work within the style of the game you're running, but it also shaves off some of the prep time and allows the players to put their own mark on their characters. Sort of a best of both worlds scenario, if you will. So, what should you keep in mind when prepping a Fate one-shot? Well, when prepping any sort of one-shot, you really need to keep in mind your timescale. The trap a lot of people, myself included, sometimes fall into is making the planned story too ambitious for the amount of time that you have. This results in either hastily having to schedule a follow-up session to finish the story, the GM fudging things to get to the end of the session, or the session just finishing without a satisfactory resolution. When I run one-shots, I generally plan for them to last about 4 hours. And I work on the assumption that roughly an hour over the course of the evening will be lost to general chit-chat, hardware problems, bathroom breaks, etc. So I figure that in a 4-hour session, you actually get about 3 hours of gaming time. For each of these 3 hours, I plan for a single encounter, and then I have 1 or 2 slightly more lightly sketched out encounters ready in case the players zoom through the first 3. As an example of this, if I was planning a pulp-style treasure hunt Indiana Jones-esque game, my scenes might be: number 1, the PCs decipher an ancient map to a lost pyramid. Number 2, the PCs are attacked by evil cultists attempting to retrieve the map. And 3, the PCs race against the cultists to get to the idol first and prevent an ancient ritual from taking place. And I might include a couple of optional scenes, such as the PCs meet with an old friend who is knowledgeable about the period when the pyramid was built. And perhaps the PCs discover that the local governor is secretly a member of the cult, planning to use the power of the idol to make himself undisputed ruler of the local area. As I'm running the session, I will have a very basic checklist of the scenes for the game on the table in front of me, and I will tick them off as they occur. This is a little more railroady or sort of led than I would normally go for if I was running a campaign game, but generally you don't have the luxury of time that these sorts of games take. One-shots benefit from having a clear goal and a fairly fast pace to them. After all, you don't have a great deal of time to make an impact on your player group. Keeping in mind the limited timescale, anything you can do to cut down the amount of book referencing that you have to do during a game is a good idea. Luckily, there aren't generally lots of charts and things that you need to check in Fate. I would recommend having a rules cheat sheet printed and to hand, since it will save you having to go back to the book or a PDF. And there's a great Fate core cheat sheet available on Evil Hat's website. Again, I'll put a link to that down below in the description. Also, make sure you have any of the stats of your antagonists or bad guys that are likely to crop up created before the session and close to hand, in whatever easily accessible format you choose. Maybe a piece of paper, maybe post-it notes, index cards, whatever, as long as you can put your hands on it easily and referencing it during the game. So, what sorts of stories work well in a Fate one-shot? Well, the stories that work well are generally fairly simple and archetypal stories. Here are a few examples. The PCs are trying to rescue a person who is being held captive by the antagonists. An item of great importance has been stolen or is in possession of the antagonist and the PCs must recover it. Or the PCs are trying to locate a place or an item that has been lost and they face dangers while doing so. There are almost certainly other story types, but you get the point. A story that is going to work well for a one-shot should generally be describable in a single sentence. It's also helpful for a one-shot if the players come to the game already knowing something about the game background or lore, since you won't have the time to expand on it too much in-game like you would in a campaign. If you're running a world of your own creation or a published Fate world, then making a setting cheat sheet available to your players a little while before the game is probably a good idea. Try to avoid extensive write-ups because it's a bit OTT, to be honest, for a one-shot, and if the lore is too extensive, the players just won't read it anyway and you'll have spent that time for no real practical gain. Keep any setting material brief and to the point. I would recommend no more than a single side of A4 if at all possible. The advantage of Fate as a system that can be used with multiple settings and that is fairly loose in terms of the rules is that it's easy to set your game in settings and places that the players are familiar with. Tell your players you're running an Indiana Jones style pulp game and instantly they'll have an idea of what sort of characters are appropriate. Pick something from TV, film, or even a computer game that your players are likely to have heard of and tell them that the game is like that. It not only makes it much easier for the players to get in the right mindset for your one-shot, but it also saves you an awful lot of work creating setting lore. Now, don't get me wrong, making a setting from scratch is great fun, but it's a lot of work, and for a one-shot, it may be surplus to requirements. So what else should you remember when running your Fate one-shot? Well, in addition to the points I've made already in this video about keeping an eye on the passage of time during a one-shot and making sure you have all your rules and relevant NPC stats to hand, you also need to keep an eye on the pacing of the game. A good number of role players, myself included, like to chew the fat a bit when we get into social scenes and the like, and this is fine in a longer running game, since you always have another session to cover any stuff you don't get done. In a one-shot, you don't have that luxury. So, am I saying that you should ban social stuff and chatter outright? No, of course not. That'd be ridiculous. The banter and interacting with NPCs and each other is a large part of what makes role-playing fun for many of us. However, you need to use a little bit of common sense to adjudicate when a scene has gone on for too long, and if it has, move things along a bit. If the players are chatting with an NPC that's just a bit of background flavour, let them have a bit of a chat, and then move things along by saying something like, "Is there anything else anyone wants to discuss with the tavern keeper before you leave the inn?" You can then summarise any additional interactions and cut the scene and fade back in at the point when they're leaving the inn. Try and ensure that out-of-character chatter is minimised, although again, not banned outright. At the table, the more people are talking about their pets and what they saw on TV last night, the less they are engaging with the game, and the more time is being wasted. If people are not directly involved in a scene and they want to have an out-of-character conversation, ask them to take the personal conversations a little bit away from the table. If it's a face-to-face game, you can then call back to them when their character comes back into the game. Or if you're playing an online game, such OOC conversations can be held via chat windows and the like, so they don't interfere too much with the main game. My last point is that you should make sure you have a climactic end scene and leave probably at least an hour for it. Ideally, you want your game to end on a really climactic scene, whether that be a combat, a parlour scene, or whatever else suits your game and genre. But ideally, it should be the big payoff for the previous few hours roleplay the players have put in and all the prep that you've put in. Nothing is as anticlimactic as a dud ending, or worse still, an ending that sounds cool but has to be rushed because the GM hasn't budgeted their time properly or is overrunning. Try and leave at least an hour for your end scene. That way you've got ample time to make it a fitting climax for your game session and really pull out all the stops. Have scenery blowing up, demons appearing, armies of evil cultists besieging the players, evil rituals, etc. Whatever's appropriate to your game. You get the idea. Make it big, make it climactic. You want your players to finish the game on a high with smiles on their faces and all talking about what a great game they had. They'll remember the game fondly, you'll feel great about how it went, and they'll tell other people about what a great game you ran, making it far easier for you to get players in the future. So there we go, there's a few tips for running a Fate one-shot, although as I said earlier, a number of the tips I've mentioned can be applied to one-shots run with any system. The best way in the end to learn one-shots is to jump in and give it a go. Speak to your players afterwards, find out what they like and what they didn't like, and then apply that to future sessions. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. You'll consider clicking on the red dice up there to subscribe to my channels. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. If you have any comments or suggestions, please put them in the comments box down below or hit me up in the Google Plus links. I'd just like to say thanks again to Zachary for suggesting this video. Great suggestion. If anyone has any more, again, hit me up in the Google Plus links or post them in the suggestions box below. I really do enjoy reading what you write. So until I see you in the next video, take care and happy gaming.